Hello, all you wonderful people, and welcome to the first installment of what will be a three-part series, What Musicals Mean to Me. This is a special that I am doing for the month of April because it is Autism Awareness / Acceptance Month. Now, in the past, I've done two different videos to remark this special occasion. The first one I did just kind of showing off the various merchandise I got from different shows that I'd either attended or just were very into in the past and at the time, sort of talking about one of my special interests. And a few years before that, I made a video discussing some of my differing viewpoints on certain topics that were being brought up in the autism community. This year, based on the title, I'm going to be discussing three particular musicals / Broadway shows that I feel have had a significant impact on me or that I feel really spoke to me as a neurodivergent woman. So, let us start with the musical, the musical, the legend, Hadestown. Now, this is one that is subject to change because I'm actually going to be seeing this one on April the 3rd, the touring cast. So, if anything, if my perspective changes at all, I will make a follow-up video discussing some additions or differing perspectives, anything that I notice that I feel is worth talking about. But today I'm just going to talk about my experience listening to the cast recording, looking at some fan works, and maybe even seeing some clips from the show. Now, I had originally planned on making a whole script and everything, but time kind of got away from me, so I decided, you know what? I'm just going to wing it and see where this goes. So I'm going to break this down into three individual sections. First, I'm going to discuss exactly how I got introduced to this musical. Then I'm going to discuss different ways in which it affected me, in as far as how it affected me as a neurodivergent individual, being the characters and also just how it ties into my special interests. So I guess that's going to be the three individual parts, and then I'm kind of going to do a bit of a wrap up. So without further ado, let's get started with our first point. I first heard about this musical during the 2019 Tony Awards, and I will fully admit I knew very little about it because I'm the kind of person who doesn't really go out of their way to really check out a bunch of new musicals. I think because I tend to stick more in my comfort zone, and also because when I like something, I really, really like it, and I tend to focus mainly on that. So I kind of went into the Tony Awards knowing next to nothing about Hadestown. Then one day out of the blue, I kind of decided, you know what? I've been hearing about this musical for a long, long time, so I'm actually going to get around to listening to it. So I consulted my trusty Amazon Alexa device, told her to play the Hadestown cast recording, and I quite enjoyed it. It sort of gave me a New Orleans jazz folk kind of vibe, kind of like The Princess and the Frog. My toes were tapping, my knees were knocking, my body was just moving and grooving to the beat. I fell in love. Though admittedly I had a little bit of a hard time understanding it at first because I hadn't done a lot of research. All I knew was that it was set in either the Great Depression or a post-apocalyptic world like the Great Depression. I'd heard kind of two different things. And then eventually I started browsing the internet a little bit more, and I found out that it was based on a very old Greek myth called Orpheus and Eurydice. So I saw a TED Ed video about that, and then after learning more about the myth, the story kind of started to make a little bit more sense to me. And after that, I was kind of able to put the pieces of the puzzle together, and I kind of had a basic understanding of it because I've always been somewhat interested in Greek mythology ever since middle school, junior high era. So I didn't really know who Orpheus and Eurydice were, but of course I knew who Hades, Persephone, and Hermes were. Though I will admit I only had a very surface level knowledge of mythology, which I will discuss in my next part. So ultimately, after learning more about the story, I started listening to the musical more and more, and I quite enjoyed it. Though I would have to say, I think what really drove me to it was kind of seeing what the fans had to say, which I will kind of get into in some of my other points, because hearing what the fans had to say kind of helped put a few different things into perspective and kind of gave me a different understanding of certain elements of the musical. So that's roughly how I came to really know about the musical. So with that out of the way, let me discuss exactly how this impacted me then and has impacted me now as a neurodivergent individual. I think what really drove me to Hadestown the most was the fact that it combines two of my special interests, them being musical theater and Greek mythology. Now, I'd already been interested in both, but I got really into musicals kind of about senior year of high school, which I'll discuss more in depth in one of my other videos, because it was a different musical that really solidified my interest in musical theater and really helped me connect with the musical theater community to a certain degree. And obviously it wasn't Hadestown, because okay, I guess I shouldn't say obviously, because eventually I learned that Hadestown was actually in production since 2006, but it only came to Broadway in 2019. And I graduated high school in about 2016. But anyways, so for the longest time I'd been really interested in musicals. I listened to a few cast recordings. I got a few t-shirts. I was even able to watch some shows that had live recordings, like Phantom of the Opera or Newsies. So that was kind of, and eventually I also learned when Hamilton came around, I think this is the one that really showed it, that musicals actually have a very, very wide variety of musical genres. You know, there are the classic show tunes like Guys and Dolls or Pirates of Penzance, you know, the really, really old school kind. But then there are some that are then there are some, like the ones done by Andrew Lloyd Webber, where a lot of them are rock operas, like Jesus Christ Superstar, and even Phantom of the Opera to an extent, because you wouldn't think of it as a rock opera on the surface, but a lot of people have pointed out that the organ music sounds a lot more like something you hear out of a rock concert rather than the classical era. So, but of course what really showed people this was Hamilton, considering that was what many people considered to be the first, or at least the most popular, hip-hop rap musical. I mean, of course, In the Heights had some of it, but it was Hamilton that really, really drew people in with this style of music and showed people that it isn't always just lazy junk, like it's kind of that it's often stereotyped as, and that it can be just as clever and well done as any other musical genre. And Hadestown, as I kind of said, had sort of a New Orleans jazz and folk vibe to it, because I remember listening to it and I thought, hey, this sounds a lot like jazz music. Not exactly what I was expecting, but hey, it's a lot of fun. And I guess that's just what really that's the best way I can describe the music, is fun. Well, most of it. Actually, the two words I can describe it as, it can either be fun or it can be emotional. Sometimes an odd combination of both. So that's that's sort of the musical piece covered, but what about the mythology piece? Well, as I kind of stated, I was already kind of into Greek mythology when I was in about junior high, when we started learning about it in school, because we read about the myth of Hades and Persephone when I was in 6th grade, but of course it was a very simplified version for younger audiences, not super young, but younger. So, of course, they framed that as the whole Hades is the evil boogeyman who's come to kidnap sweet, innocent Persephone and hold her hostage until she eats something. But, I mean, that's not entirely how it went, because, see, I started getting much more into musical theater during quarantine, because I'm pretty sure everybody has at least one weird, random, arbitrary, miscellaneous hobby or skill or something that I got into when they were locked away in their rooms, not able to get out and do whatever they usually did. So, for me, I really started to get into Greek mythology when I came across the YouTube channel Overly Sarcastic Productions, specifically the Miscellaneous Myths series, and I remember learning about it, and I was like, dude, these stories are absolutely crazy. They can be frightening, they can be fun, they can be exciting. There's just, the possibilities are endless when you get into Greek mythology. And then I also started learning about so many of the Greek gods and goddesses, and well, the first thing I learned was that Zeus is super horny, not the heroic father figure that many people assume or depict him to be. And the second thing I learned is a lot of these Greek gods and goddesses are, in a way, a lot like me or people that I know. Like, I really saw myself in Hestia, and that may seem kind of weird to people considering she's not in a lot of the mythos, but I guess what really drew me to her and why I really saw myself in her, I think I'll save that for the character. No, I think I might as well get it out here because this isn't related to Hadestown. What really drew me to her was the fact that she devoted her immortal life to her duties and didn't need a romantic partner by her side. And also the fact that she didn't really the reason she's not in a lot of the mythos is because she represented the hearth of the home and thus wasn't able to really travel or get involved in a lot of the drama that the other gods and goddesses got into. She was devoted to watching over mortals, making sure that they were safe and warm and provided for. It was her kindness and her gentleness that really drew me to her. She shows that you don't have to be a tough warrior woman or a badass huntress. You're wonderful and strong just the way that you are. That's kind of what I felt that was saying to me, because I wasn't involved in sports. I don't have witty comebacks. I'm not your typical girl boss kind of character. I can be a lot more, I'm bigger on the inside. That's the best way I can describe myself. Bigger on the inside. Unless I'm around people that I'm really, really comfortable with and know really well, or if I'm involved in talking about a subject that I'm into. Like right now, I'm able to talk a lot about musicals and Greek mythology. So, anyways, that's sort of the story of exactly how I became interested in Greek mythology, and ever since then, I've been learning so much more about the different myths and the different characters and everything like that, and I also kind of like seeing the different interpretations that people have of certain storylines and different characters, and I kind of got drawn into Hadestown because it was a very fresh and new retelling of an old myth, because I feel like nowadays originality is kind of overrated. You know, we have this idea that we need more original ideas, you know, stuff that's 100% new, 100% creative, not borrowed or adapted or recreated from something else. But even if someone claims something is 100% original, usually they were inspired by something that they'd either consumed or something in their environment, intentional or not. So, again, the thing is, even if Amber Gray, the actress who plays Persephone, she even said in an interview, you don't have to know the myth to really get into the musical. It kind of helps, but you don't have to know the myth. And that's what's so great about it, is you can just enjoy it for what it is. And there's the fact that these characters just seem so remarkably human, despite the fact that 3 of them are immortal deities. And I'll get more into that in a little bit when I discuss the characters, though admittedly I will be focusing very heavily on one particular character that I feel has had the largest influence on me, and I feel that I saw myself in the most. Whenever I'm checking out a new piece of media with a storyline, the first thing that I look for in it is the characters. Who are they? Who are they? What do they want? Can I see myself in them? How are they like me? Are they like me? Are they like anyone that I know? And let me tell you something. Hadestown is not short of lovable, quirky, fun, three-dimensional, fascinating, interesting, and overall awesome, amazing characters. But the one that stands out to me, especially as a neurodivergent individual, is the male lead, Orpheus. And I'm going to discuss why. Now, when you look at Orpheus, he's not your typical male lead. He's a lot more of a naive, innocent dreamer type. Kind of like how I describe myself, bigger on the inside. And his defining character moment, one of his most defining character moments, is in Come Home With Me, when he meets this really nice girl, and Hermes tells him, go on, but don't come on too strong. So how does it go? Orpheus straight up waltzes over to her and just says, come home with me. Okay, rather sings it, but still. Right after Hermes said, don't come on too strong, this boy straight up tells the girl that he has a crush on that he wants to marry her. Now, I know that that sounds totally insane, especially when he introduces himself as the man who's gonna marry you. But, again, as insane as that sounds, let me explain exactly why I find this moment so relatable. Now, as I started looking more into Hadestown and some of the fan works, including a few animatics, I came across quite a few people who actually said that they believe that Orpheus is on the autism spectrum because he often comes across as naive and innocent, as seen in his introduction, where he flat out tells Eurydice that he wants to marry her right after he just met her. And then there's also the fact that he tends to focus so heavily on his music, and some people suspect that music is his special interest. He uses it to court Eurydice to show him that he's not like the other men that she's met, but also to win over the shades/factory workers, basically saying, if it's true that everything is hopeless, then what are you doing just standing there? You know, why is anything worth doing if it's hopeless? And not to mention the biggest moment, Epic 3, where he finally stands up to Hades, while in a way also kind of sympathizing with him, and sings that song that he wrote to convince him to let Eurydice and him go together. See, special interests are a very, very, very important part of an autistic person's life and their entire being. It can be a source of stress relief, and it can also be a very big part of their identity. It's more than just a hobby. It's something that they dedicate so much of their time and their life to. Like how I mentioned that two of my special interests are Greek mythology and musicals. Not sure exactly how I can use that for anything useful, but for now I can at least use it to connect with people and just put myself out there for all the other people who may want to share their experiences. And, you know, a lot of people have said this because they themselves believe, you know, a lot of people who say this are also on the autism spectrum or are neurodivergent in some way. And something else that I would like to add is Reeve Carney, the actor who played as Orpheus, has actually stated that he believes that Orpheus has ADHD because Reeve Carney himself has ADHD. And that kind of reminds me of a story that my sister told me about when he was stage dooring with a fan, pre-COVID of course, when a fan asked him about that notepad he has, they were like, hey, do you actually write something down in that, or do you just scribble? And she expected a short answer, but it actually turned into a very long and very interesting conversation about how he actually uses it to cope with his ADHD. So, therefore, he said that, by extension, he believes that Orpheus has ADHD. I remember someone said that he was trying to keep in mind, the mindset of an autistic person when he was playing Orpheus, and they said it that he said it in an interview. Not sure exactly which one it is, because I don't frequent interviews that much of a theater fan as I am, but I think that it's actually entirely possible that Orpheus has both autism and ADHD, because from what I've learned, it's actually not uncommon for the two to be comorbid or to exist at the same time, because autism comes down to a differing development of the brain. So therefore that leaves room for other quote-unquote abnormalities, even though the term normal is kind of subjective. But anyways, and something that I feel really demonstrates this, some people may, a lot of people like to joke about ADHD being the whole, you're doing one thing and then, ooh, shiny. And, which is kind of listed on TV tropes. I think that's sort of what the trope itself is listed, but ADHD is actually a lot more common than that. A lot of people will obviously point to the scene where Orpheus, after talking to Eurydice, goes back to working on his song as his inattentiveness, which is part of the attention deficit part of ADHD. But something that a lot of people may not know about ADHD is hyperfocus, and that's because it's not medically documented and it hasn't been medically proven or studied, but it is something that a lot of people with ADHD can relate to and have shared their experiences with. Because the thing with ADHD is you have two extreme levels of focus, where you're either not focused at all, or you're too focused to the point where everything else kind of gets lost on you. And I feel like that's sort of what happened in A Gathering Storm and Chant. Because a lot of people, this is why I don't really like to be too hard on Orpheus, and why I am kind of bothered by the way Hermes speaks to him, with the whole brother, why do you care? You can always find another muse. I'm like, dude, harsh. Like, I know the kid screwed up, but it's not like he was intentionally being neglectful of Eurydice. I mean, I hear that in earlier versions of Hadestown, he was a lot more cocky, so I could kind of stomach it better there. But in this case, it just comes across as needlessly harsh, because, even in Come Home With Me Reprise, when he apologizes to Eurydice and mentions that she called his name, and he says that he didn't hear, Mr. Hermes told him so, and this is something that I can kind of relate to, because let me put it in perspective. There was one time when I was set to go to this separate school program called the Career Academy, which was sort of a way to take college courses in preparation for college, and I'd have to take a bus there every day. So I was sitting in the courtyard of my school reading a book, waiting for the bus to show up, and then when I finished it, I realized that the bus had already come and I missed it because I was so absorbed in my book. I wasn't intentionally trying to ditch school or be a bad student. I just got so fixated in what I was reading that I didn't see or hear the bus coming. So I feel that's more what happened to Orpheus. He didn't intentionally ignore Eurydice. He just became so absorbed in this task that he was doing, working on a song, trying to bring the world back into tune, that Eurydice's cries for help were kind of lost on him, and he unconsciously kind of blocked it out. Emphasis on unconscious. Now, before you get any ideas, This is not me trying to pass blame onto Eurydice either. I do not think either of them were to blame. And I think that playing the shame and blame game is not going to help. So if you want my opinion, I don't think either of them were wrong. I think they both had their own situations, Orpheus with his hyper focus, Eurydice running on survival mode, that just kind of led to a bad downfall, and you know what I'm saying. So, getting back to what I was initially talking about, something else that I would kind of like to add is that I saw a post that pointed out that Orpheus, kind of about Orpheus and his music, like in the introduction, Road to Hell, how he's the only one of the characters being introduced who's singing, and how a lot of the time, a lot of his dialogue is actually sung, not spoken, and even when he is speaking, it sounds very melodic and sometimes a little shaky, almost like he's more worried about talking in front of people than he is about singing in front of people. And that's another thing that I would like to add, is a sign of autism is self-stimulating behavior, or stimming. And something I've come to learn is that there's different types of stims. What a lot of people are most familiar with are the kinetic or physical stims, whatever the proper term for that is, which is the rocking, the hand flapping, the twirling, that stuff. But there's also a lot of other kinds of stims, like in Orpheus's case, that would be a verbal or auditory stim, because a lot of people don't know that things like singing or humming, can also be stims. So I feel like part of the reason why Orpheus sings so much is not only because music is his special interest, but also because I believe singing for him is a stim. It sort of helps him deal with tough situations. It helps him when he gets nervous or overwhelmed. It helps him build his confidence. So that's kind of something else that I wanted to add. And really, I've kind of been going on and on about Orpheus, and you may be wondering, how does this connect to me? Because not only have I stated that I'm autistic, but I can relate to a lot of Orpheus's mannerisms. Because from day one, for the longest time, I've been a very open-minded, innocent, naive individual. And sometimes I could be a little bit much for other people, just because I was a very, very friendly kid. I always wanted to make friends. I always wanted to get involved with people. But because I was so socially awkward, I didn't always know how. So sometimes people thought I was just being annoying or weird. And I can imagine that's kind of what Orpheus may have gone through. Maybe there were other girls that he tried to have a relationship with, but they didn't want anything to do with him because they thought that he was too overbearing. And then there's also the fact that, as I've stated many times, music is a big factor in my life. Singing is one of my stims. I hum. It helps me when I get overwhelmed. It's something I do when I get nervous. And, something that a lot of people probably also don't know about me is I tend to struggle with anxiety. I haven't been properly diagnosed with an anxiety disorder, but I do deal with a lot of anxious thoughts and feelings. And sometimes just listening to music or humming or singing a certain tune helps me deal with that. Almost like I can sing my anxiety away, make myself better than this anxious feeling that I'm having, kind of standing up to this bully inside my head. And so, again, the point that I'm trying to make is Orpheus that is why Orpheus has had a big impact on me as a neurodivergent individual, and has also had a big impact on a lot of other neurodivergent individuals. It's unclear exactly whether or not this is what Anais Mitchell intended when she wrote the character. It sort of reminds me of Newt Scamander from Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Him, because he also has a very, bigger on the inside, open heart, empathetic spirit to him. though in Newt's case, his special interest would be magical creatures, whereas Orpheus's would be music. And, you know, again, it's unclear as to whether or not Anais Mitchell intended this when she wrote Orpheus, though this is the second case where we've had a character that many fans have suspected is neurodivergent, and the actor who plays them also believes them to be neurodivergent, because Eddie Redmayne has stated that he believes Newt Scamander to be on the autism spectrum, but he just wouldn't have a name or a label for it because Fantastic Beasts takes place in the 1920s, and the first diagnosis of autism wasn't discovered until the 1940s. And that could especially be argued in Hadestown because it's unclear exactly when it takes place, and that's kind of the point, because Hermes even says, once upon a time there was a railroad line, don't ask where, brother, don't ask when. And though there are a lot of throwbacks to previous timelines, like the era itself is very 1930s. Persephone is sort of based on a 1940s lounge singer. I read on TV Troops that there was a newspaper with a headline that was sort of meant to mimic one from the 1980s. So, and not to mention it has a lot of themes of slavery, which a lot of people tend to think of around like the Civil War era. That's when it was really big. But anyways, the point that I'm trying to make is it kind of makes sense that Orpheus may not exactly have a label for what's going on with him. And that's another big part of being neurodivergent, is when we don't have a label, it can often make us feel broken, as if there's something wrong with us, but we don't exactly know what. And that's also kind of something I struggled with. I was diagnosed when I was 3 years old, but my parents didn't know how to tell me until I finally found out from a therapist. And that was when I was about 10 or 11 years old. I was in the 5th grade, so I didn't find out until I was much older. And that's suddenly when everything kind of clicked for me. Everything suddenly made sense. And, you know, a lot of people say, you've probably heard this phrase time and time again, representation matters. And honestly, the older and older I've gotten, the more I've realized how true that really is. At least in my experience. Because I remember when I was a freshman in college, Sesame Street announced that they would be introducing Julia, their first autistic Muppet. And I actually remember turning that on in my dorm room, and I was absolutely elated to finally have a character who was like me in a children's show, because when you come to think of it, there aren't a lot of autistic characters out there. There's an even rarer supply of good autistic characters, you know, well-written ones. So to have Julia, this girl, you know, who I could really relate to, her mannerisms, her reluctance to really talk to other people, or in this case, Muppets, her interest in art, her getting overwhelmed at the sound of the siren, her getting frustrated when her routine is thrown off or when things don't go right. I felt seen. I've totally been there. That is me. That was me when I was little. Though, obviously, I'm a lot more vocal than she is, you know, but no representation is going to 100% reflect someone. And it wasn't intended to. Julia wasn't meant to represent all people with autism or all autistic people. She was meant to be just Julia, who is autistic. And, you know, when I've said that autism depictions are rare, you know, good autism depictions are rare, this is especially the case in musicals, because I've really only seen one musical, and even then, this isn't like a stage musical, it was a movie musical that features an autistic character, and that was Walter in the movie Joyful Noise, and he wasn't even a main character, he was the younger brother of this character Olivia, who more happened to fall into the charmingly quirky side of the autism spectrum, where his autism mainly manifested in his sensitivity to light and his fascination with one-hit wonders. So maybe this is also sort of a call to for future musical writers to try and give us some more autism representation, because for now, I kind of find myself having to resort to headcanons like Orpheus. You know, not that headcanons are bad, I just think it'd be kind of nice to see more characters that are actually confirmed to be autistic, because Orpheus is a very good portrayal, because he does have a lot of his eccentricities, but he also has a lot of his positive traits too, and all in all, when it comes down to it, he just feels so human, like someone you could actually meet in real life. And that's who autistic people are. We're just people. Socially awkward, sometimes overbearing, naive people, but still people nonetheless. We have our own lives, our own interests, our own personalities. You know, when you think of it, it shouldn't be that hard, but I guess for a lot of people who haven't been there, it is. So, I have gone on and on about Orpheus because he is the one that I relate to the most. If I look hard enough, I can see bits and pieces of myself in other characters. I can kind of see myself in Eurydice, because as I've gotten older, I've become a little bit more cynical. I've kind of had to come on the defense, and I've become a lot more reserved, because I've often been told that my attempts at communication and socialization are wrong or inappropriate. So I kind of think, okay, if I can't do this, then what can I do? And then I can relate a teeny bit to Persephone, though I kind of mentioned in my video, in my Halloween costume video for last October, that Persephone more represented who I wished I was rather than who I am. I guess I can kind of see a teeny bit of myself in her, because she is very kind and caring, though it's kind of overshadowed by her ballsy, badass, party girl spirit. It wasn't until, because I remember listening to that cast recording, and I thought, okay, besides from where they stand morally, what's the difference between Helene and Persephone? Then we got to How Long, and I was like, that's it. That's what I've been looking for. This is it. Because that's when we finally saw a side to her that we hadn't seen throughout the musical, where she's actually coming down to Hades' level, trying to reason with him, trying to be soft with him, noticing that getting angry and trying to fight with him hasn't been working. And, then there's also sort of that thing where maybe she knows something about him that we don't know. Maybe she knows that he does have a heart underneath all that stone, even underneath that wall he built up around himself. And that's me, I don't like to be very judgmental of people, because I try to understand that everyone is going through something. I try to understand that there's more to people than what immediately meets the eye. And sometimes that can kind of be what leads me into trouble. I kind of got involved with a guy friend who seemed to have a problem with boundaries, and it seemed like a lot of girls that he'd hung out with in the past kind of had some not very nice things to say about him. And then one time, after my dad tried to figure out where he was so that we could pick him up for something, we found out that he'd been charged with something more serious than, say, drugs or theft that I don't really want to get into. And, sometimes that makes me feel really bad about being so trusting. Though I guess you could say that fits more into the Orpheus category, but the point still stands. I tend to be fairly non-judgmental toward people, fairly open-minded, and sometimes that gets me in trouble. And if I'm really stretching things, I could kind of maybe say I relate to Hades a bit. Some people are probably looking at me like I'm crazy. I'm more referring to the workaholic side of him, because I constantly feel the need to be kept busy, because I need to be working on something to feel worthwhile, to feel like I have a purpose, to feel like I'm contributing something. but then sometimes I get so absorbed in a task that it's hard for me to pull myself out of it, and I end up working beyond the point of mental or even physical comfort. Like, I get mad at myself for having to eat or sleep or go to the bathroom. But like I said, that's stretching it a bit. So, to summarize, Hadestown really speaks to me as a neurodivergent individual, despite the fact that Orpheus himself hasn't been confirmed by the creator canonically to be neurodivergent. I and a lot of other people like myself have found myself relating to a lot of his mannerisms. So, to wrap this video up, Hadestown was a musical that I got into in late 2020, and what drew me to that was not only the up-tempo, emotional, powerful music, but also the implementation of the musical theater storytelling and putting a different spin on an old Greek myth, since I tend to really enjoy different adaptations and different spins on old classics. I started getting more and more into it, seeing what the fans had to say, trying to understand, everything that this musical had to offer, and the more I got into it, the more I realized that Orpheus is a character that, despite being male and despite not being confirmed to be neurodivergent, is a character that I saw a lot of myself in, and that's really only the second character that I've seen that's really the second or third character I've seen in a musical that I can say about that. And I'll get into the other two in some other videos that I plan to bring you this month. And overall, and again, may this be a call to future artists out there who may want to make a movie, a TV show, or especially a musical, stage or screen, that representation does matter, and that autistic people, no matter how strange or confusing or annoying or bizarre we may seem, are just people, and we want to see ourselves. We want to have our voices heard. We want to have our stories told. So it's unlikely that Anais Mitchell is watching, but I just want to say thank you. Thank you for creating a musical that has not only inspired me artistically, but has also left an impact on me as a person and shown me that I don't have to be ashamed of who I am. Thank you all for joining me, and I hope you'll stay tuned for the rest of this month when I discuss the next musical, 6.